The blue and red lights flooded my rearview mirror, a heart-stopping kaleidoscope of my worst fears realized. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, knuckles white. It was over. The chase, the desperate, adrenaline-fueled flight from a crime I knew would catch up to me, had ended on this desolate stretch of highway. They swarmed the car, guns drawn, their shouts a muffled roar against the pounding in my ears. The cold steel of the handcuffs biting into my wrists was the first moment of true stillness I'd felt in days. That's when reality crashed down, not in a wave, but like a building collapsing on top of me. The arrest was a blur of flashing cameras and reporters shouting questions I couldn't answer. In the interrogation room, the air was thick with tension. Detectives laid out photos on the cold metal table, each one a nail in my coffin. I saw the evidence, the pieces of a puzzle that pointed directly at me. My denials felt hollow even to my own ears. It was a performance, a last, desperate act before the curtain fell. The story they wove was compelling, airtight. By the end, even I started to question my own memory. Was this monster they described really me? The trial was a spectacle. From my defendant's chair, the courtroom felt like a theater, and I was the unwilling star of a tragedy. The prosecutor was a master storyteller, painting me as a cold, calculating villain. My own lawyer, overworked and underpaid, did his best, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. The jury's faces were unreadable masks, but I could feel their judgment, a palpable force in the room. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, a hush fell over the court. Guilty, the word echoed, sealing my fate. And then came the sentence, death row. It wasn't a shock, more like the final, logical step in my descent. Stepping into the maximum security prison was like entering another world. The clang of the iron gates behind me was a sound of absolute finality. I was stripped of my name, given a number. My life was now contained within a 6-by-9-foot concrete box. The sounds of the block became the soundtrack to my life. The distant shouts, the metallic scrape of doors, the heavy silence of despair. The other men on the row, they weren't just inmates. They were ghosts, living out their final days in this concrete purgatory. Each man had a story, a path that led them to this same dead end. My first night, I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, the gravity of my situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just prison. This was the antechamber to the end. Every day is a carbon copy of the last, a monotonous routine designed to break you down. Wake up, count, eat, yard time lockdown. The only thing that changes is the date. Another day crossed off a calendar with no future. I began to write, to pour everything onto paper. The fear, the regret, the suffocating loneliness. It was the only escape I had, the only way to prove to myself that a person, not just a number, still existed in this cell. This is my story, from the beginning of the end. Thanks for listening, and if you want to hear more about life on the inside, make sure to follow. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he turned the photo over. It was Marianne's apartment. The kitchen counter, a mug with a chipped handle, a smear on the tile that didn't look like blood until you knew it was. But what caught his attention wasn't the mess. It was the clock on the wall, frozen at 1:47 a.m. That clock, his lawyer, Ross, said. It stopped when the power flickered. There was a surge reported in the building at 1:48. The coroner's estimate puts the time of death between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Parker swallowed hard. I was on the road at 1:30. Ross nodded slowly. We have traffic cam footage placing your truck on Route 9 at 1:33. But the prosecution says you could have doubled back. I didn't, he said, the word brittle, fragile. Ross leaned in, her voice low. Then help me, because there's something else. She flipped to another image. This one showed a shoe print near the back door. Partial, smeared, but distinct. The tread pattern wasn't from Harker's boots. It was smaller, lighter. We're trying to get the lab to prioritize it, Ross said, her frustration clear. But evidence has a way of disappearing when the narrative is convenient. Back in his cell, Harker felt the walls inch closer. Death row wasn't just about punishment. It was about waiting in a space designed to make time feel like an accusation. Days were measured by meals and counts. Mondays meant showers. Wednesdays meant mail, letters scanned and photocopied, the originals destroyed. Sundays meant a brief visit behind glass, hands inches apart, voices carried by phones that crackled with static. On the tier, men learned each other's rhythms without ever touching. There was Luis Moreno, who recited prayers under his breath at night. Walter Pike, who spent his hour of recreation pacing the yard in perfect squares. And James "Red" Callahan, who laughed too loud and too often, as if daring the silence to swallow him. The guards rotated. Some were professional, distant. Others were cruel in small ways. Late meals, missed mail, a door closed a little harder than necessary. Every infraction was documented. Every favor had a price. Weeks bled into months. Ross filed motions. Appeals crawled through the system. And the shoe print remained stubbornly under review. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived without a return address. The paper was thin. The ink smelled faintly chemical, as if it had been handled too much. "You don't remember me," it read. "But I remember you. Check the diner. The one on Route 17. Ask about the basement." Parker read it twice, 3 times. The diner had been closed the night of the chase. A fire years earlier had damaged the lower level. The owner never reopened the basement to the public. He showed the letter to Ross at their next meeting. Her jaw tightened. "This could be nothing," she said. "Or it could be everything." 2 days later, Ross called with a voice that sounded like she'd been running. The diner owner agreed to let us look. Off the record, they went at night, accompanied by a retired investigator Ross trusted more than the system. The front door creaked open. Dust hung in the air. The smell of old grease and burned coffee lingered like a memory. At the back, a door led to a stairwell chained shut. The chain was new. They cut it. The basement was colder than expected. Concrete walls, old shelves, a single bulb dangling from a wire. And on the floor, beneath a tarp stiff with age, they found a box. Inside were personal effects, keys, a wallet, a phone charger. Items that matched what Marianne's family said was missing from her apartment. Just as Ross reached for her phone, it buzzed. A message from the lab finally came through. The shoe print didn't match Harker. Their eyes widened. As they lifted the tarp further, they saw it, a symbol carved into the concrete. Small, deliberate, unmistakable. The same symbol had been found, previously unnoticed, in Marianne's kitchen, and it belonged to someone else entirely. When Ross turned to leave, the basement door slammed shut behind them. Someone had followed them, and on death row, for Harker, the clock had just started moving in the wrong direction. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories like this, make sure to like and subscribe. The basement door didn't just close, it locked. The heavy bolt slid into place with a sound that felt like a final judgment. I spun around, yanking at the handle, but it was solid, unmoving. Above us, a single bare bulb swayed, casting our twisted shadows against the damp concrete walls. For a moment, the only sound was our own breathing. Then we heard it. Footsteps on the stairs outside. Slow, deliberate. Whoever was out there wanted us to know this wasn't an accident. "State your business." The retired investigator I was with barked, his hand instinctively reaching for a gun he no longer carried. Only silence answered. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. A uniformed deputy stood there, out of breath, his eyes wide. "You're not supposed to be here," he stammered. "This whole place is sealed evidence." The investigator just stared at him. "Since when?" The deputy didn't answer. He just stepped aside, waving us out. By the time we got back to the parking lot, he was gone. That night, lying in my cell, I couldn't sleep. The investigator's description of the basement, a strange box, and a symbol he found kept replaying in my mind. On death row, information is currency, but it arrives in broken pieces, filtered through layers of bureaucracy. But this felt different. This felt dangerous. The next morning, the entire tier was on edge. Doors slammed shut earlier than usual. The morning count took forever. When my breakfast tray slid through the slot, it rattled. I pushed the food away, my appetite completely gone. At 10:17 a.m., my cell door opened. 2 guards stood there, their faces blank masks. "Inmate 77142, one of them said flatly. "Legal visit." My lawyer, Ross, looked pale, angry, and wired with an urgency that made my own heart pound. "They confiscated the items from the diner," she said, wasting no time. "Labeled them unrelated to the case. And the symbol? They're claiming it's just old graffiti." "That's a lie," I said. "I know," she replied, leaning closer to the thick glass partition. "And someone powerful wants this buried deep. I ran that symbol through a private database. It's not random. It's used by a prison gang, a small, regional crew, but notoriously violent. They call themselves the Iron Circle. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. What does that have to do with the victim, Marianne? Ross hesitated. Her brother. He did time. 8 years ago. The small visiting room suddenly felt like it was shrinking. You think this was revenge? I think, she said, her voice low. She recognized someone at the diner who shouldn't have been there. And I think you were the perfect person to frame for it. Back on the tier, the whispers started, traveling through the vents like ghosts. The guards moved with a new, sharp tension. That afternoon, during my hour in the rec yard, I saw him. A new inmate across the yard, shaved head, with a tattoo peeking out from his collar. A circle, intersected by 3 straight lines. The iron circle. He met my gaze, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. That night, a tapping started on the wall of my cell. 3 short knocks. A pause. 2 more. It was the code, the language we used to speak through solid concrete. I pressed my ear against the cold wall. A voice, barely a whisper, hissed through the vent. You should have stayed quiet. Now everyone's watching. The following week, things got bad, fast. The other inmates on my tier, men I'd known for years, started to change. One by one, they were removed. The guards just said medical, but they never came back. Ross filed an emergency motion, citing witness intimidation. The hearing was scheduled, then postponed, then reassigned to another judge. Someone's leaning on the system, hard. Ross told me on her next visit. And they're not being subtle. Evidence started to disappear. The shoe print report was delayed indefinitely. Security footage from the alley behind the diner was suddenly corrupted. Then, Ross stopped answering her phone. 3 days of silence passed. 3 days of pure, gut-wrenching panic. Then, I heard something. Not from Ross. It was a guard, one of the older guys, who slipped a small envelope into my hand during the evening count, his eyes refusing to meet mine. Inside was a single photograph. Ross's car, abandoned on the side of a road, the driver's side door wide open. Her keys were still on the seat. Pinned under the photo was a note, written in stark, block letters. Drop it, or the next door won't open. Panic is a luxury on death row. Most of us burned through it years ago. But this wasn't about appeals or execution dates. This was immediate. This was happening right now. I had no lawyer, no access to the outside world, and a target on my back. So, I did the only thing I could. I talked. I used the network that the prison system could never control. I passed information through the walls, through the vents, to the other men who knew the system's dark secrets. Because when the official channels fail, sometimes the only ones you can trust are the people who have nothing left to lose. Thanks for watching. Follow for the next part of the story. Within 48 hours, a name surfaced. Evan Klein, a former corrections officer, fired 6 years ago for using excessive force. Now, he was rumored to be the Iron Circle's inside man. The chilling part? Klein was working the very night Marion died. The realization hit like a physical blow. If Klein was involved, this wasn't just about a single murder anymore. This was a system eating itself from the inside out. Ross reappeared a week later, visibly shaken but her resolve unbroken. She'd been run off the road, she told Harker. Threatened, warned to back off. I'm not stopping, she said, her voice firm. But you need to understand, if we keep pushing, they might try to silence you permanently. Harker just looked at her. They already sentenced me to death. What more can they possibly do? Ross didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer came 2 nights later when alarms blared through the prison, tearing through the silence. Lights blazed. Guards shouted orders. Doors slammed shut one after another. Harker was forced to the floor as heavy boots thundered past his cell. By morning, the rumor was confirmed. Evan Klein was dead. They found him in his home, an apparent suicide. But the symbol, small and deliberate, was carved into his kitchen wall. And just like that, the Iron Circle wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a warning. Because if Klein was dead, it meant someone was cleaning house. And for a man on death row, it had suddenly become the most dangerous place to be alive. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more. What if I told you that the most secure prison in the world wasn't designed to keep people in, but to hide something much, much bigger? Welcome to the story of Black Rock Penitentiary, a fortress carved into a remote mountain, a place from which no one has ever escaped. Officially, it houses the world's most dangerous criminals. But the truth? The truth is far more chilling. Our story begins with Elias Thorne, a brilliant investigative journalist. He was getting too close to a shadowy corporation known as Omnigen. They were involved in illegal human trials, secret technology, things that could rewrite the laws of nature. Just as Elias was about to expose them, he was framed for a crime he didn't commit and sentenced to life in Blackrock. For Omni-Gen, it was the perfect solution. Discredit him and bury him where no one would ever hear from him again. Inside Blackrock, Elias quickly realized this was no ordinary prison. The guards weren't just guards, they were highly trained operatives. The other inmates weren't all hardened criminals. Many were scientists, whistleblowers, and political dissidents, people who knew too much, just like him. They were the forgotten ones, erased from the world. The prison's state-of-the-art security system wasn't just to prevent escapes. It was to keep the outside world from ever looking in. Elias learned from a fellow inmate, a former Omni-Gen physicist named Dr. Eris Thorne, that the prison itself was a facade. Deep beneath the cell blocks, in a sublevel known as the core, Omni-Gen was continuing its forbidden research. They were using the prison as an inexhaustible source of test subjects, hidden from any form of oversight or morality. The entire facility, from the guards to the warden, was run by the corporation. Blackrock wasn't a prison, it was a laboratory. Elias knew he couldn't just escape. Exposing the truth was the only way to bring down Omni-Gen and free everyone. He started gathering a small, trusted team, a master hacker, a former Special Forces soldier, and Dr. Eris himself. Their plan was audacious. It wasn't about breaking out, it was about breaking into the core. They needed to access Omni-Gen's central servers and leak every byte of data to the world. The plan was set in motion during a manufactured prison riot, a perfect cover for the chaos they needed. While the guards were distracted, Elias and his team navigated the hidden service tunnels, bypassing laser grids and pressure plates. The hacker worked miracles, turning Omni-Gen's own security systems against them, creating ghost signals and looping camera feeds. They reached the entrance to the core, a massive vault door that had never been opened from their side. This was the point of no return. Using schematics provided by Dr. Eris, they overloaded the door's magnetic locks. It hissed open, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. A vast, sterile laboratory filled with strange technology and human subjects in containment pods. The heart of Omni-Gen's evil was laid bare. As the hacker frantically downloaded terabytes of incriminating data, alarms blared. The warden, a ruthless Omni-Gen executive, sealed the core and flooded it with a neurotoxin. It was a race against time. The data transfer was agonizingly slow. The team had to fight off waves of Omni-Gen's elite security force, buying precious seconds. Just as the upload hit 100%, the warden cornered Elias. But it was too late. The data was out. News outlets across the globe were receiving the files. The world was beginning to see the truth about Blackrock. In a final, desperate act, Elias triggered a catastrophic overload in the core's reactor. He knew it was a one-way trip, but it was the only way to ensure Omni-Gen's research could never be used again. The explosion tore through the mountain's foundation. The world watched in shock as the story of the secret lab under the prison unfolded. Governments fell, Omni-Gen was dismantled, and the survivors of Blackrock were finally freed. Elias Thorne was never found, presumed lost in the explosion. He became a legend, a ghost who sacrificed himself to expose a conspiracy hidden in plain sight. But some say, when you look at the ruins of Blackrock Mountain, you can still feel the presence of the man who broke into prison to break the truth out. What do you think really happened to Elias? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge what you think
Iron
you know.
Circle.
This didn't have to be complicated. One of them said calmly. You just didn't know when to stop. Harker thought of Marianne, of Ross, of Moreno, of every man who disappeared into silence. I stopped being quiet the day you framed me, he said. The punch came fast. Then another. He tasted blood, felt ribs crack. But as one man reached for his throat, sirens erupted outside. Floodlights snapped on. State police, a voice boomed. On the ground, the iron circle scattered. 2 were tackled. 1 escaped into the darkness. Ross emerged from behind a cruiser, gun shaking in her hands. She'd done the unthinkable. She'd gone public. The confession letter had been mailed anonymously days earlier to a federal journalist, to the Department of Justice, to 3 oversight committees. The story broke before anyone could stop it. By morning, Redwood Prison was swarming with investigators. Arrests followed. Then indictments. The Iron Circle wasn't dismantled, but it was exposed. And Harker? His conviction was overturned. Marianne Caldwell's real killer was identified, not an inmate, but a former guard she'd recognized and confronted. Panic, rage, cover-up. Harker walked out of prison into daylight he hadn't seen in years. Ross stood beside him. They didn't celebrate, because 3 months later, another body was found. Another whistleblower. Same symbol, different city. The Iron Circle had survived. And somewhere, deep inside America's most restricted prison units, someone was already waiting for the next door to open. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.